You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 7th of January 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, Venezuela appears to reach an oil deal with the United States. We'll look at that and the broader regional reaction a few days after the American military operation to oust Maduro with our own Ed Stalker. That's coming up in just a moment after that.
If Ukraine is going to make a final deal, they have to know that after a deal, they are secure. They have obviously a robust deterrence, and there's real backstops to make sure that this will not happen again.
Jared Kushner there announcing in Paris that the U.S. will be part of a deterrence plan for Ukraine if a ceasefire with Russia is agreed. We'll speak with Paul Waldy on the ground in the French capital. We've also got the latest business headlines. We'll talk about the state of global development aid with Kate Schechter in Washington, D.C. And finally, the Trevi Fountain, an institution in Rome, is now going to be charging entry to foreigners. Is nothing sacred? All that right here on a jam-packed edition of The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope you've had a good start back to work, whatever you're doing heading into the new year. We will start with Venezuela, which has seen the first lucrative deal or highway robbery, depending on who you might be asking, since the weekend operation that ousted Nicolás Maduro as president. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that Venezuela will be turning over some 50 million barrels of oil. In the meantime, he's also continued to threaten Colombia, Cuba, and even Greenland for being potentially next. Well, Ed Stalker is Monocle's Europe editor-at-large and former America's editor-at-large. He joins us on the line from Milan. Ed, I've purposely gone for both of your titles because of this segment. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. Indeed, thanks for that. I appreciate it.
And you have also visited Venezuela, so let's start with that. Just your thoughts on the country, its potential, what it's going through right now.
Well, that's a big question for me there, Chris. Yes, I have indeed been to Venezuela. I was there during the days of Hugo Chavez, so pre-Maduro, when it was, relatively stable. Oil exports were in a much better place back then. Money was being poured into social programs. It was sort of relatively early on in Chavez's rule, and Caracas was still a safe place to walk around. Obviously, the crime levels in there are much worse since I visited. A sort of fascinating country, complicated to unpack, spiraling into all sorts of problems, and obviously this latest drama, just part of many twists and turns, really, in its history, Chris.
Absolutely. So many twists and turns. And we've obviously been talking a lot on this show about Venezuela and the weekend operation. What do you make of the news from today specifically, or last night rather, this oil deal? I mean, do we get the sense that Venezuela's government is essentially protecting itself now, the vice president, now President Fernandez, complying with U.S. demands because it's the only way to survive?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, obviously, one of the Trump rule books that has been interesting to watch is the fact that he's, in difference really to many former leaders, is that he's been very open about sort of what he wants to do. He sees the world in a way as one big real estate development, or, one big opportunity. And he's been very open. And you mentioned, Colombia, you mentioned Greenland. He's been very open about, the fact that he wants to put America's interests first. He obviously does see Venezuela, not uniquely so, but through the fact that it has the biggest oil reserves in the world, 1/5 of global stock. So this huge potential. We know that Donald Trump also sees the world very much as a fossil fuel world. And so he sees this possibility. Now, we've all been sort of wondering what post-Maduro Venezuela will look like. We still don't know. We only know, obviously, that Delcy Rodriguez, who was, vice president, is now interim president, and seems to sort of have, the backing of the US for now. At one point we might have thought, oh, maybe Maria Corina Machado, who of course was barred from running in 2024, but is the recent recipient of Nobel Peace Prize, maybe she would be the sort of anointed leader of Venezuela. But they seem to think, the US, that it's easier to sort of keep people who are part of the Chavistas, people who, inherited the mantle, if you like, from Hugo Chavez, who were under Maduro. They seem to think it's easier to keep them in power for now and see if they can, make them malleable, if they can make them work with the US. So that's the big question now. Delcy Rodriguez, as this interim president of Venezuela, has got a difficult job to do, in the sense that, Maduro may be gone, but all his senior staff and close associates are still there in power. So she somehow has to, keep them happy, keep them pleased, and make this decision whether she placates the US. And for now, it seems she's, willing to do that, in the sense that we have this deal to export up to $2 billion worth of oil to the US. Obviously, the coming days and weeks are going to be super interesting to see how this relationship with Venezuela continues, because obviously, beyond the fact that there was this military operation to remove Maduro, there aren't boots on the ground in Venezuela. This has not been a full-scale invasion. So how can the US control, as it says it wants to do, Venezuela without having that brute force, if you like, on the ground, Chris?
Well, Ed, it does also want to, the US wants to control through coercion, obviously, much of the Latin American continent, for that matter. This isn't just about Venezuela. And as you mentioned there, it's not really about democracy if they want to work with Delcy Rodriguez and the remnants of the regime. What have you made of the reaction of other Latin American nations? Is Trump almost succeeding, frankly, in remaking the continent, because he has now taken out Maduro to get Venezuela to comply? And there's a very disparate group in Latin America, but obviously you've also spent time in Argentina, for example, where Javier Milei is ostensibly on Trump's side, even if a country like Colombia obviously is not.
Well, yeah, Javier Milei, as you would expect, he's a big supporter of Donald Trump, has been speaking glowing terms about what happened there. It was kind of, all of this is been super interesting in the context of America's relationship, a bit like you say, Chris, with Latin America. Some pretty nefarious things happened in Latin America, instigated in large part by the US. Don't forget, there was a training school for Latin American military into the year 2000 in the US, the Organization of the Americas, the School of the Americas, rather, that trained many Latin American military leaders that would organize coups in Latin America. And, back in 2015, when Barack Obama was speaking about its new relationship, the US's new relationship with Cuba, he was saying we don't have to be imprisoned by the past. And he was sort of talking about this break with the US treating Latin America like its backyard. That was always how it sort of viewed Latin America. So when we see something like this, when we see a leader being taken in the night by this US force, it kind of immediately brings back memories of how the US always used to act in Latin America, and how Barack Obama wanted to turn a page on all of that. You mentioned Colombia. Well, obviously, it's obvious that Colombia would take a strong position from the point, it's a bordering country with Venezuela. Don't forget also that there's been a serious migration flow Venezuelans have been leaving Venezuela in their droves. Many of them have crossed the border into Colombia. So this is a social issue as well as a political one for Colombia. The fact that it's having to deal with all these Venezuelans coming into the country and having to deal with the social implications of all of that. And of course, Latin America, South America is outspoken about what it sees as a violation of the rule of law. The fact that the election of Maduro was contested, the fact that it was widely viewed that Edmundo Gonzalez had won back in 2024 is beyond the point. It's the fact that this is acting outside the law. So we've seen strong reactions, not just from Colombia, but other nations across the region, including Brazil, of course.
Monocle's Europe editor-at-large, former America's editor-at-large, Ed Stalker in Milan. Thank you, as always, for joining us, and welcome back to the new year of 2026. Now here's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. France's foreign affairs minister says his country is working with its partners on how it would respond to the US if the Trump administration acted on its threat to annex Greenland. Trump has repeated that the US needed Greenland for security reasons, prompting Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen to warn that any attack by the US would spell the end of NATO. One of the most notorious spies in US history has died in jail at the age of 84. Aldrich Ames, a former CIA case officer, was responsible for the arrest and eventual execution of numerous Soviet and Russian officials secretly working on behalf of the US intelligence community. South Korean restaurants are to allow dogs and cats under revised hygiene and safety regulations. The country had ran a pilot program for the new policy for 2 years and will officially implement it nationwide from March 1st. Under the revised rule, restaurants must post clear signs at their entrances informing customers whether animals are allowed inside. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. And as you heard in that first headline, that was related to what we'll be talking about now in Paris, because after months of stalemate, a summit in the French capital yesterday of the so-called Coalition of the Willing for Ukraine yielded some surprising results, with European leaders and US officials backing security guarantees for Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire with Russia. Still, the fact that this was done with the US envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner rather than the US president is perhaps notable, not to mention the fact that Russia has yet to agree to any peace deal that would lead to these security guarantees being put into place. Well, joining us from Paris is Paul Waldy, Europe correspondent at the Globe and Mail. Good afternoon to you in Paris, Paul.
Hi there.
Good to speak with you from the French capital. What was the mood there yesterday? I mean, did this feel like a true breakthrough?
Well, I mean, it sort of felt like a true breakthrough. I mean, there was a lot of talk from Macron, from Keir Starmer, and even from the U.S. envoys Witkoff and Kushner, that this was kind of a milestone event, that this really was going to make some kind of progress towards a eventual peace plan. The problem, though, is that there's not a lot of detail. And one of the things Zelensky said was that he really wanted this to be legally binding, these commitments. They don't want to run into a situation where something happens and, countries fail to kind of show up to protect or to back up the peace plan. So I think he's a little bit leery. He's kind of stuck to this comment that the peace proposal is 90% there. And he said that really hadn't changed after yesterday. So yes, probably good news for some parts of this plan, but still a long way to go.
Paul, I have to ask and be frank on this. When you talk about legal guarantees, given the world we're currently living in, the context of what happened in Venezuela that we were just talking about at the top of the show as well, the fact that Donald Trump was not even there, is there a sense that even if Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are buying into this, that America would actually genuinely come to Ukraine's aid and provide security guarantees going forward?
Yeah, and that was certainly put to both Witkoff and Kushner. And in fact, Marco Rubio was supposed to be at this meeting, but of course he bailed out because of everything that's been going on in Venezuela. Witkoff was firm and he said, look, yes, the U.S. is going to stick by whatever commitments are made. I mean, really, the U.S. role in this is going to be a monitoring role. They're not going to be it doesn't sound like they're going to be part of any kind of troop contingent. They're not going to be part of any kind of military force or anything like that. They're really going to be on the monitoring side. So I think that's a little bit removed from what Britain and France are proposing. But nonetheless, it's a contribution. And Woodcock did say that the U.S. would stick by that. So, we'll have to see. Now, of course, overhanging this entire meeting was Venezuela and Trump's comments about Greenland, which, of course, struck at the heart of what a lot of the Europeans were thinking. So there was an awful lot of sort of background tension there between the U.S. people and the Europeans in particular.
Absolutely. And I do want to ask you about Canada as well, Paul, being part of this, but also the news that a former Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, is leaving Canadian politics and joining the Ukrainian government, essentially. What has been made of that over there?
Well, I don't think it's a huge surprise. Freeland was and always has been a virulent supporter of Ukraine. Her family has Ukrainian roots. I think her mother is from Ukraine. She speaks Ukrainian fluently. She has always been a huge supporter and backer of Ukraine ever since Russia's initial incursion in 2014. So I think it wasn't a huge surprise. She'd kind of come and gone with the Liberal Party. She'd been the deputy prime minister under Trudeau. She kind of was leading the charge for Trudeau to resign. And then when he did, she ran for the leadership. She lost to Carney. And he's kind of put her on the back shelf. So it's not surprising she left the government and that she's stepping down as an MP. She had already taken on a role as kind of Canada's Ukrainian advisor, if you will, or envoy. So it wasn't a huge leap to see that she might make that permanent by taking on some kind of role with the Ukrainian government. But it is interesting, and she is quite a force. So it's going to be a big plus for Zelensky. And I think it wasn't a massive shock to Canada.
Paul Waldy of the Globe and Mail in Paris. Thank you very much for joining us after a busy day over there yesterday. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio.
Monocle reports from around the globe, in print, on radio and online. As our editors and correspondents head from city to city, they get to know the hospitality hotspots, better boutiques and cultural standouts. Check out Monocle's directory with our online city guides. From Bangkok's best to the latest in London. From the hottest Hong Kong haunts to Milan's must-sees. There's plenty to discover. Take a tip from us. Explore our online city guides. Available now exclusively to Monocle subscribers at monocle.com.
You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak, and it's time to get the latest business headlines now with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. And Ewan, we've been talking a lot about Venezuela on this show and with you on Monday, so we're actually going to take a different turn for today. We're starting in the UK, I understand. There's been a warning about high energy prices and the government's green policies.
Hello, Chris. Yeah, this is a story from the FT today. Businesses are accusing the government of making Britain uncompetitive and threatening their survival. One company boss describing energy policy as a jam tomorrow strategy. Now, the UK has pretty much the highest industrial electricity prices in the world, and household prices aren't far off that as well. Now, the exact reason for that is something of a political hot potato. The Green lobby and the what you might call the drill baby drill lobby both blaming each other. But there is no doubt that bills have been inflated in recent years by the cost of transitioning to greener power production. Because while solar and wind power are nowadays cheap to install and they're very cheap to run, there are two big problems. First, of course, intermittency. The UK is a windy island and it is sunny here sometimes, but there are days when it is neither of those things. And on those days, of course, we need up to 100% backup production. So that's expensive in itself. And the other thing is the infrastructure. Our infrastructure in the UK, like many countries, was built for the days of coal-fired power production. So the production now with offshore wind is in a totally different place to where we used to burn the coal. So therefore, the infrastructure just doesn't work for renewables. So we need to spend tens and tens of billions of pounds getting that fixed. So that is all very expensive. And for industrial users, those already hefty bills are about to get worse. There's new charges being added in April to fund the construction of a big nuclear power plant. They don't come cheap. And for those electricity pylons. One analysis says that some of the country's biggest energy users, that's going to add the best part of £500,000 to their annual bills by the end of the decade, an increase of about 5%. For its part, the government argues that delivering clean power is the best way to bring down energy costs in the long run and to create greater domestic energy security. But it is very much a live debate.
Yeah, affordability and energy prices, a live debate in so many parts of the world. But let's cross over the Atlantic, Ewan, where in addition to all of the Venezuela news, there's actually something else that's been making headlines and the business community. A certain German supermarket, Aldi, of all ones, is now taking the US by storm. Is that a surprise?
Yeah, never mind Venezuela. This is the big story out of America. I love a supermarket story, Chris, as you'll know. I'm a big fan also as a shopper of German discounter Aldi. And here in the UK, you can't move for Aldi's. You can find them the length and breadth of the country. So I was fascinated
Aldi
to
and
read.
Lidl, for that matter. It's amazing how these German discounters have done, yes. And now they're over in the US.
Absolutely everywhere, yeah. There's a Bloomberg deep dive into the success of Aldi in the United States. The US is a famously tough retail market to crack. Britain's Tesco, which at the time was the most successful international grocer in the world, spent over $2.5 billion trying to crack the US market before giving up and going home with its tail between its legs about a decade ago. But Americans, it seems, can't get enough of the German competitor. Aldi's got ambitions now to have more than 3,000 stores in the US by the end of 2028. That's only, 3 years away. That'll actually be more than any other operator, apart from, of course, the ubiquitous Walmart. It's a private company, though, so the numbers aren't published, but it's estimated Aldi's 2024 sales were about $29 billion, and that puts it squarely ahead of Trader Joe's into the number 2 spot in the US. Interestingly, one of the factors behind Aldi's growth was actually the pandemic, because US shoppers are traditionally very brand loyal. They buy far more branded products than we do here in Europe. But during COVID, private label products managed to gain sales when shoppers resorted to buying whatever they could find in the store. And they actually found out that the cheaper options tasted pretty good. So that's really driven some of the supermarkets like Aldi and Lidl. So they are doing very nicely, thank you, in the US.
Really interesting stuff. Good retail story from the US. And again, goes back to that affordability story as well. Ewan Potts, thank you very much for joining us. Ewan Potts from Bloomberg. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio.
How long do you think it would take you to travel the world to hear from the most perceptive and relevant speakers on the global news agenda? To mix that up with a trip to visit the business people benchmarking best practice in media, retail and hospitality. And to make time, too, to delve into a rich mix of great design stories and rich cultural discoveries. Well, you can do all of this in just 60 minutes each week by tuning in to The Curator, a whistle-stop tour of the best of the last 7 days on Monocle Radio. Subscribe and download the show now or listen every weekend on Monocle Radio.
This is The Briefing, and it's time now to head to the world of foreign aid and development, because while the focus for much of the past year has been on the Trump administration's cuts to foreign aid, the elimination of the aid agency USAID, it also appears to have opened the door, perhaps, for other countries to cut their own aid budgets. That includes here in the UK, and even the European Union is shifting some of its focus from direct aid to geopolitics, economic development in Africa as well. Private aid groups have filled some of the void. And joining me to talk about the state of global development in 2026 is Kate Schechter, President and CEO at World Neighbors, an NGO, joining me now from Washington, D.C. Kate, great to have you on the show. Good morning to Washington, D.C.
Thanks so much for having me. Good morning and Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to you as well. We can still say it for the rest of this week, we're figuring. Tell us what your work has looked like in the past year, though, before we get to 2026.
Well, the past year has been tough. With the elimination of pretty much all U.S. government support for foreign aid. Even an organization like World Neighbors, which was not wholly dependent on USAID, took a hit. We had a big program in Southeast Asia that was focused on helping rural communities, farmers, to deal with climate change and with the rising sea levels and with how to deal with disasters, climate disasters when they hit, which they do every year. So that was something that was really a huge program. It was robust. It was spreading to many islands in Indonesia and to Timor-Leste, and all of that was cut. We continue to work in Southeast Asia on a much more diminished level, but we don't want to walk away from the programs that we've started, so we continue to work there. But honestly, for the other programs that we have, we work in 14 countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We were able to keep those programs at the same levels that we had been working before. And so we've been blessed to get a lot of support from private funding and to continue to work with private funders, both foundations and individuals and family foundations. The United States has a very large and robust program of helping wealthy families to figure out how to donate to causes that they feel are worthy of their donations, and we have tapped into that quite a bit over the years. World Neighbors is almost 75 years old. We'll be 75 in April. So that the relationships with these private funders have been going on for many years, and that has allowed us to continue despite the volatility in the work that we do.
It's really interesting to hear that, Kate, sort of some of these private funders stepping up now and across your 75 years at World Neighbors. Are you surprised by that? I guess this could have gone two ways, in the sense that with governments around the world, frankly, focusing more inwards, have you seen that translate almost to kind of citizens and, as you say, these private funders, wealthy donors? Are you able to solicit extra donations from them? Is there more goodwill on the private side still, even if not from governments?
I would say there is. We have been able to talk to individual donors and explain the situation to them, and there's been a wave of goodwill towards organizations like World Neighbors who are on the ground. You know, we talk about grassroots. We really are grassroots. I just had the opportunity to visit our programs in northern India, in both Uttar Pradesh and in Bihar. And what I also saw, is a lot of gratitude towards organizations like ours that are continuing to support them despite everything that's going on, but also a real effort to tap into local resources, to tap into benefits that are available from the Indian government if the rural communities know about them and can apply for them. So that's a big part of what we do, is try to be a liaison to look at what is available on the ground that these communities are not tapping into yet.
Just finally then, Kate, I mean, when you look towards your 75th anniversary, which is coming up in April, what does this year then look like for you? You're talking there about these private donors stepping up as well. Presumably, we're not going to see some kind of reversal from government. So what does that mean for an organization like yours? How do you keep this going in 2026 and the years after?
Well, we've been through a lot. 75 years is a long time. We've seen ups and downs through all these decades, and we'll continue to expand to try to reach more and more communities, marginalized, isolated communities that haven't had assistance. We are a small organization, but we also have a lot of flexibility and agility because of that. And I see next year, or this year, as a year of growth, a continued growth for us in terms of reaching new communities, thinking about new areas of assistance that we may not have thought about yet. When I was in India, there was a real demand for making sure that children, very poor children, have access to school. And the communities themselves came up with the idea of bridge schools, of small schools in the communities where the children don't have to go far, that will then help them to get to a level where they can go to the government level schools. So there's always going to be new ideas, new growth, new need, and I'm confident that we'll be able to continue to meet that.
Well, it is incredible that you've been able to keep so many of your projects going in this difficult environment. Kate Schechter, President and CEO at World Neighbors, joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much. This is The Briefing. And finally, on today's show, if you were hoping to visit the Trevi Fountain in Rome this year, you'll be surprised to find that as of today, there is an entrance fee for the famed fountain, but only for foreigners. The plan, announced last week, follows a trend in tourism of charging international visitors. Next week, later this month, you'll be seeing the same thing at the Louvre in Paris, where ticket prices for non-European foreigners will be 45% higher. Monocle Radio's Anita Riotta joins us now from our Paris bureau. Anita, I'm imagining, the French are very used to striking. Are the international visitors joining in that kind of mood? Will they be rioting in the streets of Paris when the prices go up at the Louvre?
Well, if they have taken to the streets today, they're probably going to have to balance their picket signs with their phones and try to buy tickets for the next week, because they have exactly 7 days to go to the Louvre before these ticket prices go up. Like you said, the ticket prices a week from now will be 32 euros, which, if you consider how many museums around the world have their permanent exhibits free for visitors regardless of nationality or age, is quite a steep ticket. And if you make it, if you're going as a couple or a family, it's quite a lot. But the museum is defending the move, saying that it thinks it will generate about 20 million euros a year, and that this money is essential to tackle what they are calling some structural problems in the museum, which clearly at this moment in time is most notably sort of revamping their security measures after the heist at the end of last year. But they're also talking about, building more infrastructure and making sure that the museum remains up to quality, up to standard.
And I understand, Anita, that the same argument basically is going to be made in Rome with the Trevi Fountain. Once free, now a cost for foreign visitors. Do they really need the money?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think the two situations are entirely comparable. Now the Trevi Fountain is asking international tourists to pay 2 euros. Obviously, the Louvre is the world's biggest museum, so the price difference there is understandable. But there is something, I think, to be said about the fact that the Trevi Fountain is outside. It's ingrained in a neighborhood. It affects businesses and residents in a way that, it being inside of a building maybe doesn't necessarily. I was reading that in the first 6 months of 2025, over 5 million visitors went to the Trevi Fountain. Of course, again, the Louvre has staggering numbers of visitors, but, imagine you have the cafe next to the Trevi Fountain. It's a boon, but it's also chaos, and it also probably means a lot of a degradation of the neighborhood, of just the sidewalks and trash and things like that. So the argument that, again, Rome is making is that they just do need this money to clean and to make sure that the neighborhood remains pristine. Now, does that money always end up where it's supposed to go? That's a different argument.
That certainly is. It'll be interesting how they go about implementing that in Rome, in the middle of the city. Monocle's Anita Riotta in our Paris bureau. Thank you very much for joining us today. That's all the time we have for this packed edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Tom Webb. Our researcher was Annalise Maynard, and our studio manager was Steph Chungu. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.